Anirban, that looks like a great, a very comfortable chair you got there.
Yes, it is.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and also hit record. Oh, it is recording. And then I'm going to go ahead and go live on Facebook. Let's see what happens here. Choose where to post your live video. Should I just do it on my timeline, or should I do it, or on a page I manage? I feel like I should do it on my timeline.
I would do your timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael Rogers is here. Hello, Michael Rogers. Preparing live streaming preview. We are excited. Michael Rogers is on my team. If you guys haven't, if Molly and you and Patty haven't met him yet, then
I haven't.
He's a future superstar. Reed Knox is saying hello to everybody. He's in the Q&A. Oh, here we go. Live producer is,
What is this on your Facebook timeline?
No. Sharon's here. There's a chat and there's a Q&A. I don't quite know. Hi, everybody. I don't know what the difference between chat and Q&A is, but hey, Bob Kimball's here. This is very exciting. You guys can see Anirban Basu. We're about 2 minutes early because I'm trying to make sure, I'm trying to figure out how to go live on the broadcast. So bear with me, everybody. Let's see. Oh, actually, that's okay. So let's see here.
Hey, Brian.
Hi, Andrew.
Okay, there we go. And go live. And, oh, a video title. Okay, add a title. ECONO, economic and housing market. Okay. Video and hello, it is 1 o'clock. We are live on Facebook, and I am really excited here. Thanks everybody for hopping on. If you are here at the Zoom webinar, you would be able to post in the chat and or the Q&A. So I'm not sure, forgive me, this is the first one that I've done like this. So we've got a Q&A and a chat. I just want everybody, you know, if you want to just pop on and just type in and say hi, make sure everything is working correctly. In the meantime, I'm super excited. I'm Alyssia Essig with the Essig Bass team of Coldwell Banker Residential Brokerage. I know that's a mouthful. I'm excited that you guys are here. My team is here with me as well. I'm just excited. I have had the honor and pleasure of seeing Anirban speak at company events in the years past, board events in the years past, and you know, in my travels and conversations with friends, colleagues, clients, they're all asking a couple of questions, and they all surround, you know, how are we going to recover from all of this, and how long is this going to last? I mean, I don't think Anirban's going to be able to answer that, but you know, maybe he is. So I thought let's go to Yoda. By the way, May the 4th be with you. Did you get it? It's May 4th. Okay, anyway, I thought I'd bring you Yoda and do our best to answer as many future questions. And I went to my two favorite people, Patti Click from PrimeLending, mortgage loan officer, nationally recognized by the Scotsman's Guide as top producer for 2019, and a Live Baltimore partner lender, one of the top lenders for the Maryland mortgage program in the state, and is a mortgage coach black belt, as well as PrimeLending power producer. May marks her 15th year anniversary in the mortgage business. Go Patty. So I reached out to Patty. Patty does a lot of our loans, and I was super glad when she said absolutely yes. And I reached out to Molly Gilbert, who is the Vice President of Business Development for Terrain Title, spent the last 17 years in the Maryland real estate industry, during which she acquired extensive knowledge on all residential and commercial aspects of the title world. Molly has played an integral role in improving both companies' sales and reputation, developing relationships with clients throughout the country and conducting numerous closings, and is one of our favorite title people as well. Lives in Parkton and enjoys spending time outdoors. Listen, it's kind of a crazy market right now. And I know that, one of my agents on the team actually wrote an offer this weekend that we're still waiting to hear because there were 17 offers on this property. And I know that there's a lot of like mixed questions, and so I'm super excited to introduce you Anirban Basu. If you're not familiar with him, he is a chief economist to the Associated Builders and Contractors and a chief economic advisor to the Construction Financial Management Association. Named one of Maryland's 50 most influential people and one of the region's 20 most powerful business leaders in 2010. He is an economist with a sense of humor. Anirban, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't thank you very much. And Molly and Patty, thanks for doing this. And you guys are seeing what's happening. Are you guys seeing in the market as well?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Alyssia. Thank you to the Essig Bass team for having me here today. It is a privilege to be with you. I'm going to run through some slides for this audience regarding the presentation. I did not expect the Star Wars reference. If I had known that, I would have themed my presentation accordingly. And indeed, I'm watching all of the Star Wars movies now, as it turns out, as one of the at-home activities in which people have to engage these days. But I've used a Lord of the Rings themed presentation. It's entitled Return of the Economist. A lot of ways to start a webinar. I think prayer might be appropriate, but also the Pledge of Allegiance or National Anthem, whatever. Lots of ways to start a meeting. I'm a big fan of the ring verse, which goes thusly: 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness find them. I think, the Dark Lord has been pretty busy. We'll talk about that. I've organized the presentation in this fashion: 9, 7, 3, and 1. 9 rings for the kingdom of men and women, 7 for the dwarves, 3 for the elves, 1 for the Dark Lord. You'll see that framework throughout the presentation. And as I say, the Dark Lord has been active. This is a reflection of, through April 27th, global cumulative confirmed cases of COVID-19. So even though we see this light at the end of the tunnel, we can hear daily press conferences from Albany, the governor of New York, talking about a decrease in hospitalizations in New York. We can hear talk about the Chinese economy coming back to life, and so on and so forth, the Italian economy, what's going on in Georgia and Florida, and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is we're still in the midst of this crisis. The global pandemic is still full of force. There had been this discussion, you might remember, we've heard so many things over the course of this crisis. Some have been proven correct, some have been proven incorrect. But one of the things that we had heard or have been hearing is that warm weather will make this better, perhaps. But if you look at the COVID-19 cumulative confirmed cases across the country, you'll notice that, southern Florida has been deeply affected. Warmer weather there, southern California, and so on and so forth. And so while warmer weather might help, it certainly is not in and of itself the cure. And so let me first walk you through the good news. And the good news is really a stroll through memory lane, the economy as it had been. And of course, we're going to get into residential dynamics, demographics, so on and so forth, things to expect from the housing marketplace during the months and years to come. So I'm going to talk about first the economy as it was and what we're trying to get back to ultimately, the status quo ex ante, hope, reasons for hope in the kingdom of men and women. It was good, wasn't it? That economy was good. The complaint I heard from realtors was not about a lack of interested buyers. Indeed, the millennials were really, showing themselves. Several years ago, we joked about them living in their parents' basements and attics. Then they moved into really expensive apartments, obnoxiously expensive, newly constructed apartments. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them, and that spawned an apartment building boom. 5 years ago, the most common age in America was 23. So when you've got a lot of 23-year-olds turning into 24-year-olds and then into 25-year-olds and 26-year-olds, you're going to get a lot of apartment rentals. and ultimately you're going to get a lot of units developed. The most common age in America today is 28. Second most common age in America today is 29. Third most common age in America today is 27. So guess what you get? You get people who are thinking about forming households and buying homes. And so the complaint had been what? We got buyers. It's a good job market. Interest rates are low. We're going to talk about that in a moment. I don't have much inventory to show them. And one of the factors, of course, was this profound rate of job growth we'd enjoyed pre-crisis. When America had added jobs for 113 consecutive months prior to the downturn. During those 113 months, we added 22 million net new jobs. Now, when does this downturn begin? March 9th. So March 9th, that sounds pretty specific. It is. Because it wasn't until March 9th that the financial markets took note of this emerging pandemic. Up until that point, the stock market actually done pretty well. And a lot of folks took comfort in that. So, well, if the stock market's not worried, why should I be worried? But on March 9th, the Dow Jones falls more than 2,000 points. That at that time was a record a point decline in the Dow Jones's history. It wasn't until 2 days later, March 11th, that the Utah Jazz are ushered away from the basketball court. Perhaps you remember that, when it was discovered that their all-star center, Rudy Gobert, was infected with COVID-19. Just a few days later, another Utah Jazz all-star, Donovan Mitchell, was diagnosed. The Utah Jazz is a very good team. In any case, at that point, the NBA season is shut down, and people are really starting to take note, my goodness, this is different. Now, I could still make the case for you that the economy is in good shape, statistically, not actually, but statistically. I mean, yes, we suffered that job loss in March, 701,000 jobs, and you'll note that that rivals the worst months of the Great Recession. This is monthly job growth in America, back to March of 2002. But March is misleading. The March data are misleading. Why? Because the reference week, the so-called reference week, when the Bureau of Statistics conducted its study, was early in March. And so that negative 701,000 represents only a snapshot, a small tip of the iceberg snapshot of what happened in March. As you know, during a recent 6-week period, more than 30 million Americans have filed for initial unemployment, and we're going to get more numbers for April and May that are going to be much, much worse than this. We're in the midst of it. But, you know, again, I mean, if you wanted to make the case the economy is in good shape, you actually could, you know, turn to a set of statistics to make that case. I'm not going to make that case, as it turns out, but we'll talk about the economy as it's going to be. That's more important. But this is Maryland non-farm employment. This is change in employment between March of 2019 and March of 2020. Believe it or not, according to the official available data, Maryland supported 6,500 more jobs in March of 2020 than it did in March of 2019, including 1,000 additional jobs in manufacturing and 7,600 jobs additionally in the sector that includes construction. Again, when we get the April data, the story is sort of going to change, but the April data are not yet available. We're just in the early phases of May, of course. And so these are what the data say. Now, don't get me wrong. You can start to see some of the effect of the pandemic here in the data. Look at the very bottom here, leisure and hospitality. Because one of the first things that happened with these social distancing directives is that we started to cancel meetings. People started to cancel hotel stays, started to eat less at restaurants. Leisure hospitality is mostly hotel and restaurant employment. And so you can start to see the effect in March, but it obviously is going to get much, much worse. Again, I want you to enjoy this part of the presentation, if you're going to enjoy anything, because this is, again, the best part of the presentation. It actually gets more grim from here. Now, this is for the 25 largest metropolitan areas in America, most populous metropolitan areas. This is percentage job growth for the period March of 2019 to March of 2020. So, again, the data indicate that in March of 2020, there were just as many jobs in the Baltimore metropolitan area as there were in March of 2019. That's what you said, 0.0% percentage change number for Baltimore. Washington Metro actually 0.9% growth. Phoenix 2.7% higher. All of this is changing, obviously. I'll show you more data on that in a moment. But again, enjoy this. This is the way it was. Nostalgia takes us back to March. That's when the economy was last good. I mean, we're less than 2 months into this crisis. It feels like forever. I get that. And you can see from some of the people who are sharing the screen with me, I mean, their hair is a mess. I mean, it's really been devastating, obviously, along so many different dimensions. But I mean, should anyone allow their banks to be that long? I don't know. But that's a debate for a different day. And I don't want to get into controversial or political matters. My job is talking about the economy and the data. So with all that job growth over time, what happened? You know, unemployment fell down to 3.5%. before it rose to 4.4% in March. 3.5%, as it turns out, is a 50-year low in unemployment in this country. You would have had to have gone back to December of 1969 to find unemployment as low as it had been pre-crisis. And just to give you a sense of how long ago that was, the Orioles were good back then. So that just gives you some sense of how lengthy that was. Now, here I'm showing you male unemployment, female unemployment in blue and green respectively, and overall unemployment in red. Interestingly, during the previous economic downturn, the downturn that begins in December of 2007 and ultimately morphs into the Great Recession, male unemployment rises faster than female unemployment. And that's because a lot of the job loss was in sectors like construction and manufacturing, sectors that tend to be male dominated. Women are more likely to work in education, health services, so on and so forth. And those sectors are generally less cyclical. This time around has been different. Women have actually been affected more by the downturn because women tend to be more associated with leisure and hospitality, daycare centers, schools have been shuttered, of course, including private institutions. So a lot of job loss there. And also because women make up so much of the front line in terms of healthcare delivery, an easy majority of American nurses, for instance, are female. Actually, women have been in this cycle been affected more in terms of rising unemployment than men. And we'll see that become more apparent as we get more data beyond March. But in any case, this is unemployment rates for those same 25 largest metropolitan areas in America for March. And what do you see here? Pretty low rates of unemployment. Now, that's changed because the unemployment rate pre-crisis in America was 3.5%. My best guess is, or my best estimate is, that as of right now, the US unemployment rate is probably in the range of 18 to 19%, and will soon be above 20%. Again, hard to know. We'll get the official data, and it depends upon the reference week in April and so on and so forth. As I said, 30 million Americans, plus more than 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment insurance over a recent 6-week period. And so if you do the math on that, you get towards 20% unemployment actually pretty quickly. Now, with all of that job growth and low unemployment, with states raising minimum wages, and despite that, employers still holding on to workers and in fact hiring new ones, with companies like Amazon raising their minimum wage to $15 an hour and the Bank of America at $20 an hour, we saw some significant growth in wages. So more people working, more people earning more work, more on the job. This is growth in wages and salaries as measured by the U.S. Employment Cost Index. And you can see here what the pre-existing trajectory had been. Really nice. Now you might ask me the question, Anirban, you said that we had a 50-year low in unemployment. Why did we not have a 50-year high in wage growth? I noticed that even with the recent acceleration in wage growth, that during the expansion of the 2000s, wage growth actually peaked at a higher level. Why is that? Demographics, to a large extent. I mean, that's part of the story. So one of the things that we observe is the retirement of baby boomers en masse. Some of the baby boomers now in their 70s. And so because often baby boomers earn more than others, because part of one's compensation often is a reflection of one's not just experience and skills, but also one's tenure on the job. So if you take, for instance, local school teachers, if they have been in the system for 25 years, let's say, they've received their step increases, they've received cost of living adjustments over time. And so the longer they've been in the system, the more money they make. But as those people edge out of the data into retirement and are supplanted by millennials and now members of Generation Z, the youngest members of the American workforce, that would have a suppressing effect on the statistic. But nonetheless, more people working, more people earning more money. So they're putting stuff in the baggins. They were shopping. This is US retail sales graph back to March of 2000. Now, you probably heard that March retail sales were devastatingly bad. You probably heard companies like J. Crew maybe going into bankruptcy, so on and so forth. Yeah, coming out of this period, there's going to be a lot of empty storefronts, a lot of empty office suites, a lot of malls that don't have the occupancy that they have enjoyed. The e-commerce economy, of course, got another shove forward. I mean, how many of us routinely order from DoorDash or Grubhub, or of course have been shopping largely on Amazon or Wayfair, whatever online platforms you can think of. So that's part of the reality. We'll talk about the economic implications of that later in the presentation. But again, a stroll down memory lane where we'd come from since the Great Recession and how much progress we've made as an economy. Here is the miracle. From a realtor's perspective, this was the miracle. And I have to tell you, much of my last 2 years as an economist has been spent unlearning economics. Here's what I mean. For instance, I have been taught, as many of you have been taught, that when unemployment goes down, inflation goes up. It's called the Phillips curve. Very basic. And economists have put forth such theorems not simply because they make intuitive sense. They make intuitive sense, of course, but because sure enough, they explain the data. In other words, during each and every previous economic expansion cycle, when unemployment had fallen, inflation had gone up. Not this time. This is a very prominent measure of inflation. This is a consumer price index, or core CPI, very prominent measure of inflation. This measure of inflation suggests that inflation over the last year for true of data has been running at 2.1%. Now, it is conceivable that we'll have deflationary pressures going forward. We'll deal with that during Q&A. But this is quite low. I mean, for us to have a 50-year low in unemployment and just roughly 2.1% inflation, which is basically the Federal Reserve's target for inflation, 2%. It is their target. In fact, there's a measure of inflation that the Federal Reserve prefers to the core CPI. It's called the core PCE deflator. PCE stands for personal consumption expenditures. And that measure of inflation suggests that last year inflation ran around 1.6 or 1.7%. Just remember that number. We're going to come back to that. But when inflation is low, interest rates tend to be low. This is the yield on the 10-year Treasury. The 10-year Treasury, as I'm speaking to you today, is at 0.63%. Low. Now, many of you know that this is the most liquid bond in the world. That's why it gets all the attention. I mean, more people are selling and buying 10-year Treasuries on a daily basis than any other bond in the world. That's why people like the 10-year Treasury, because they always know that if they have to buy it, they can buy it. If they have to sell it, they can sell it. But it's also a fear factor. The fact that interest rates are so low, in fact, the 10-year Treasury's yield has now slipped to 0.627% as I have continued with this webinar. But the fact that people are holding on to these bonds, even though they're yielding such little interest, of course, is fear. And they're fearful because the markets are volatile. They're fearful because Warren Buffett announced that he sold all his airline stocks. They're fearful for a number of reasons. So you can have too much of a good thing. But if you think about mortgage rates, if you're thinking about getting buyers to buy, then that's wonderful. And of course, when mortgage rates are low, when interest rates are low generally, and when the economy is strong as it had been, guess what happens? Property values rise. This is the S&P Case-Shiller U.S. National Home Price Index, graph back to February of 1995. And again, this fits neatly or comports neatly with supply-demand dynamics, doesn't it? So realtors said, look, I got lots of buyers to show homes to. It's difficult for me to give them inventory, to show them, virtually or otherwise, a lot of properties available for sale. Now, in my mind, the situation is actually going to get worse before it gets better. So one of the things that these rising property values were doing was it was resulting in home builders wanting to build more units. So home builder confidence coming into this period of crisis was at a 20-year high. The home builders recognized that the inventory of unsold homes was low. The number of homes for sale. That the proportion of the public looking to buy a home was on the rise. Mortgage rates, demographics, so on and so forth. So this was an opportunity for home builders to meet unmet demand. This is U.S. residential building permits. And you can see late in 2019 and 2020, this real surge in building permits, that was largely single-family building permits. So a lot of the capital during this residential building cycle has gone into apartment construction. Of course, we know that. Home ownership is not anywhere close to where it had been pre-crisis, pre-Great Recession, pre-previous economic downturn. But residential builders saw an opportunity to, really, put out new units, so subdivisions, so on and so forth. Obviously, in Central Maryland, it's more difficult to put out a lot of units because we've run out of a lot of the land available to build residentially. But nonetheless, there is more supply coming in Anne Arundel County and some other places, Hartford County. But now, given the downturn, given that credit is probably tightening up for construction loans, a lot of these units may not be built, not in the near term, which means that the active inventory is going to continue to be under pressure, and there's going to be probably more buyers and sellers. And so it's not surprising to hear realtors talk about, ongoing bidding wars for properties during the midst of a pandemic, because there are a lot of folks out there whose needs have changed. So, I was going to put my parents through an assisted living center. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not putting my parents into a nursing home. I'm buying them a house, or they're going to stay in their existing house for longer. And that means that fewer units are going to be freed up. This is Maryland housing unit sales, March of 2005 to March of 2020, as it turns out, March of 2020, 15 years of data. What it shows is that as of March of 2020, year over year, unit sales in Maryland went up 166 units, which translates in 2.5% increase in units. And again, March, I'm sure realtors have had difficulty just simply settling, just because we can't be proximate to one another. So that creates a different set of dynamics. Thankfully, we had some technologies emerging prior to the crisis that, electronic signatures and so on and so forth had become quite commonplace even prior to this crisis. And of course, that kind of technology has been very useful, nothing to be taken for granted. This is months of inventory by Maryland County, March of 2020. Look how low the inventory was coming into this period. Prince George's County, 1.3 months of supply based on the pace of sales in March. Montgomery County, just about the same. Howard County, so that's Central Maryland. Now, you can find more inventory on the Eastern Shore, a place like Kent County, home to Chestertown, or Somerset County, home to Crisfield, so on and so forth. But, generally speaking, this was the status quo ex ante. And if I'm right that the number of new single-family homes to be built, or even townhomes to be built, is not going to be what it would have been because of this pandemic and tightening credit, it's going to put even more pressure on the inventory to satisfy the needs of buyers. Well, that's going to be difficult. So what would you expect to happen? Yeah, bidding wars and prices to be quite firm. The homeowners in Maryland, for instance, should feel pretty good about owning a home. It's a tangible asset. It's not susceptible to the volatility of financial markets. Of course, financial markets have been volatile, but it was wonderful pre-crisis, wasn't it? The stock market's return. I mean, it was awful during the Great Recession, but you remember that old joke? Perhaps you told it. My 401k is now a 201k. Do you remember saying that? By the way, no one laughed at that joke. But then with the stock market's rally, that 201k became an 801k. And then March 9th came, and then March 12th, and then March 16th. Each of those days set records for daily declines measured in points on the Dow Jones. That was an awful week, obviously, for the Dow Jones. I'm pretty impressed, actually, by how well the stock market has held up since that time. The Dow is down a bit today. The NASDAQ is up a bit today. But how great was it? I entitled this slide, but it goes to Eldon, paying homage to the fact that there are a lot of elves in Lord of the Rings, but also to fully understand the title of the slide, one would have to harken back to a movie that came out in 1984 called This is Spinal Tap. And if you get that reference, this becomes hilarious. But if you don't, it's fine. It doesn't matter. The point is that Dow Jones just took off. So you had more people working, more people making more money on the job, their home values rising, assuming, of course, they own a home, and their portfolios becoming thicker as well. Fantastic. That's where we were, status quo ex ante. And the economy, if anything, was gaining momentum during the early phases of 2020, as measured by job growth and some other things. But even as that economy was growing, there were some vulnerabilities that emerged. I mean, it's no different from any other economic cycle. You might remember, if you do remember, the 1980s, that even as that economy continued to flourish through the mid-1980s, there were some issues that emerged in commercial real estate and overbuilding. During the decade of the 2000s, as that economy continued to grow, there were some issues with respect to lending and excess home construction, so on and so forth. Every economic cycle brings with it its own set of vulnerabilities. There are some vulnerabilities this time. Something would have got us into recession even if it had not been for the pandemic. I mean, there are some things that work. And one of the sources of vulnerability was the fact that not every segment of the economy participated fully in the expansion. I'll give you some examples. Agriculture. A lot of farmers have had to deal with not just trade wars, but low soybean prices, low corn prices. So they've taken on more debt. Farm finances are, generally speaking, not in good shape in America. Single-family home building was quite soft for many years, was about to take off, but didn't have that opportunity. It's a shame. And then manufacturing. This is the Institute of Supply Management's Purchasing Managers Index. Now you see the 50-yard line running east and west across that slide. Any reading less than 50 means that manufacturing in this country is in recession. Now, of course, it was in 2001 during a general recession. It was in 2008, 2009 during that downturn. And it was for 5 months late last year. Trade wars, strong US dollar, which frustrates US export growth, a weaker global economy in 2019, the fact that the US auto sector peaked in roughly 2016. All of these factors conspired to drive manufacturing recession for about 5 months last year. The reading's less than 50. Now, what happened late last year? And it was encouraging. We got that first phase trade deal with China. We got ratification of the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Because of Boris Johnson's resounding victory in the United Kingdom, we got more certitude regarding Brexit. When was the last time you talked about Brexit? You've talked about Boris Johnson maybe recently, but not Brexit. And so some of the uncertainty that had surrounded the global supply chain has begun to abate. And as a result, by January, the reading goes up to 50.9, US manufacturers are in recession. But by February, thanks to the buckling of the global supply chain, which begins, of course, in China, the reading goes to 50.1, and the most recent reading down to 41.5, which means that manufacturing has now entered a period of quite deep recession. And there's other sources of vulnerability. How about indebtedness? So what I'm showing you here are data from the Congressional Budget Office. I think one of the things about which realtors are concerned, I suspect along with other Americans, is that the national government, the federal government, is having taken on a lot of debt to deal with this crisis. Now, the light purple or pink colored bars here represent the March 2020 baseline, the pre-COVID-19 estimates of what our deficit was going to be for 2020, the first set of bars, and 2021, the second set of bars. Then the estimates were updated by the Congressional Budget Office in April of 2020, given what the federal government has been spending to deal with the crisis. As you know, to date, there have been 4 rounds of stimulus. I'll review those later in the presentation. But the expectation is now that instead of having $1 trillion deficit for the current federal fiscal year, our deficit will be $3.7 trillion. And that next year, instead of having $1 trillion deficit, because of this, it'll be $2.1 trillion. And one could make the argument that America has been growing for a lot of the wrong reasons. Here's what I mean. Let's do some simple math. So last year, America's economy grows 2.3% in real, meaning inflation-adjusted terms. I just mentioned a measure of inflation, the core PC deflator. Let's just use the PC deflator, the personal consumption expenditures deflator, that suggests that inflation had been running around 1.6 or 1.7% last year. Now, if you add those two numbers together, the 2.3% plus the 1.7%, in nominal terms, America's economy grows about 4% last year, in nominal terms. Okay, let's do some more math. America's federal budget deficit last year, 2019, was $1.02 trillion. We, the American people, produced $21.7 trillion in economic output last year. So if you do the math on that, our federal budget deficit equaled 4.6% of GDP. You take away that 4.6% federal deficit spending, there is no economic growth in America, at least not statistically. Now the dark blue colored bars represent forecasts of America's federal budget deficit as a percent of GDP pre-COVID-19. Again, this comes from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. And we had deficits in front of us as far as the eye could see, and now they're going to be even bigger. So that's one of the sources of vulnerability. But from the perspective of a realtor, the greater issue might be the fact that American households have amassed so much debt. So here I'm showing you various flavors of household debt. In orange, mortgage debt. In red, student loans. In blue, credit card. Look at the red segment here. That's student loans. Oh my goodness, how much student loans have climbed over time. That's a problem. Now you might say to me, Anirban, but interest rates have been low, so debt service has not been problematic. I agree. And the job market has been strong. But this is one of the reasons that the American economy melted away so quickly. Now we talked about, the economy is, there's some economists, believe it or not, who in February and into early March said, we can avoid recession. Can you believe that? But the notion was that this US economy had so much momentum that it was an irresistible force. But the irresistible force met an immovable object, and the immovable object won. That's COVID-19. And one of the reasons there's so much stress in America right now is there is this pre-existing debt. That people are, 30% of folks miss their rent in April, and even more will miss their rent in May. And then they get their credit card statement and their auto loan. And, and their student loans. And they say, I can't pay this. This is a vulnerability. Corporate debt has never been greater in America. Another source of vulnerability. Days into the crisis, what did you hear? Boeing needs $60 billion. We did. Now, part of that was because they had their own issues with the 737 MAX. That was part of the reason that manufacturing was in recession late last year in America, because of Boeing's issues. But they were vulnerable coming into the period. And you might say, Anirban, I thought corporate profits were rising. The stock market's been rising. Isn't that been a reflection of solid corporate performance? Yeah, you're right, it has been. But this is what happens when you buy back your shares every year. You issue debt to buy back the shares. Debt goes up, equity goes down. And this is also what happens when you buy your leading competitors. 2017 was a huge year for mergers and acquisitions. It was a record-setting year. And often those deals are financed with debt. 2018 was a big year for stock repurchases. Well, that was right after we passed that corporate tax cut in late 2017, so that makes sense. But so lots of debt, another source of vulnerability. So airlines right now are taking on more debt. and other manufacturers and so on and so forth. Then there's the issue of productivity growth or lack thereof. Because ultimately, it's productivity growth that determines how rapidly a country's living standards will rise. I mean, you can pump up living standards for a time by debt accumulation, but ultimately, it's about output. So I won't go through all this. I'll just pick off the second bullet here. U.S. productivity has risen at an average rate of 1.3% since 2007, compared with a 2.1% average since the end of World War II. What does that mean? Let's talk about this. So productivity is measured in terms of output per hour worked. So when I was growing up, what did I hear? I heard that America's average rate of growth per year will be 3% per year in real terms, 3% a year. That was America's average growth, Anirban. That's what I heard. But sometimes it'll be more, sometimes it'll be less, sometimes Jimmy Carter's president, sometimes Ronald Reagan, but it's 3% a year on average. If you ask an economist like me today what it will be, what will I say? 2%. What's the delta? Well, right here. Economic growth is productivity growth plus labor force growth. That's it. And by the way, labor force is not growing that quickly either. And it's not becoming that much more productive. So a lot of our prosperity has been borrowed from the future. That's an issue. And by the way, we've been focused a lot on COVID-19, obviously, almost exclusively. It's not that North Korea has gone away. It's not that the Middle East has gone away. It's not that there couldn't be another pandemic around the corner. I mean, there's so much risk out there. This is a global economic policy uncertainty index. Now, interestingly, coming into 2020, risk coming from the rest of the world was actually abating because we signed that first phase trade with China. Seems that global tensions around the notion of trade were diminished. We got ratification of the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, the so-called new NAFTA. We got that resounding victory for, by Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom. Not to say I'm a Boris Johnson fan or not. I'm glad he's feeling better. But the point is, there was less uncertainty coming from the rest of the world. Unfortunately, now with global supply chains buckling, with so much anger in the world, whether toward China or other societies, with everyone going their own direction from a positive perspective, you're going to see this index rise. And then finally, we came into this period, the last source of vulnerability I'll talk about, with high asset prices. The stock market was priced to near perfection. The NASDAQ on February 19th reached an all-time high of 9,800. The Dow Jones was, crested towards 30,000. So what goes up can come down. What goes up a lot can come down a lot. So this is the Shiller price earnings ratio. So what I'm trying to do with this slide is trying to compare the price of shares on the S&P 500 against their underlying corporate earnings. Now there's been an adjustment, obviously, to share prices recently. The Dow is at 23,516 as I'm speaking to you. But prior to that, you would have had to go back to March of 2000, the month before the month of the bursting dot-com bubble, to find share prices so richly valued. So I'm not going to say that the markets were priced to perfection, but they were priced handsomely. Now, don't get me wrong. The last decade over which we saw this stock market rally was a fabulous one for America. I mean, for decades, America's share of global output is in decline. And some of that is on purpose. We do that on purpose. It's the Americans who fomented or fashioned the Marshall Plan to help rebuild the European economies after World War II. It's the Americans who spent their own treasure to try to help accelerate the recovery of the Japanese economy post-World War II, trying to turn our sworn enemies into our future trading partners, and boy, did it work. Germany today is the fourth largest economy in the world. Japan is third. But during the previous decade, something different happened. America's share of global output actually rises from 23% at the beginning of the decade to 25% at the end. Look, I know we Americans have issues. Our broken politics and our indebtedness and our insolvencies of, pension funds and so on and so forth. But we do something right. We're home to less than 5% of the world's population and a quarter of its output. And I might, be tempted to say something patriotic and maybe somewhat cheesy. I think based on these data, we Americans may be the least messed up people in the world. Maybe that's too patriotic. I don't know. And I've said that on webinars with Canadians, and they have balked at that. But in any case, set that aside. This is certainly not about Canadians, nor should it be. But does this performance, as heady as it is, justify this performance? This is stock market returns by a country or a region, 2010 to 2019. Look at America, 256% total return on the stock market over the previous decade. Compare that to the emerging markets, 49%, or India, 46%. So whether I speak in absolute terms, looking at, let's say, price earnings ratios, or relative return terms here, this market came in really richly valued. And we'll see what the market does going forward. I mean, we continue to live with this period of volatility. And again, many of us have been surprised that the markets have held up so well. And the reason it's held up so well is because the Federal Reserve has cut interest rates to zero and, often do whatever it takes to keep financial markets liquid, because the federal government has passed 4 rounds of stimulus and more is, on its way. But it's treacherous times. Again, there was this naivete among economists, some economists, not all, that suggested that somehow this economy had enough momentum to carry us through. That completely misunderstood the nature of this crisis. This is, to try to simplify, a lot of people have tried to compare this to 9/11 or 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, or October of 1987, if they're thinking about the stock market. No, this is different. Why? It's a supply shock. We took the economy and we shut it down. And this downturn does not respect, or did not respect, the pre-existing momentum of the US economy. There's some things that make COVID-19 different economically. I mean, it's a supply shock of a caliber unknown in modern times. It's quarantines and travel bans, closure of public places. We simply cannot transact, at least not the way we used to. And so that supply shock leads to factory closures and cutback in service provisions, including by government, by the way. And that's one of the sources of my frustration. I had hoped that government finances could hold up during this period, state and local government finances. They haven't. I'm waiting for that stimulus package for state and local governments. I know many governors are. But in Maryland, for instance, the comptroller said a couple of weeks ago that for the current fiscal year, the current state fiscal year, which ends June 30th, we'll have a $2.8 billion shortfall. Well, that's big money in Maryland. And that means furloughing public sector staff or worse. And that adds, of course, to the misery coming out of the private sector. And so as we shut down the economy for reasons of public health, to try not to overwhelm our healthcare capacity, we throw people out of work, of course, and that in turn produces a demand shock. Because if people can't work, now they can't pay this bill or that bill, their rent or their mortgage or whatever it happens to be. But ultimately, the problem with this is a supply shock. We turned the economy off. I mean, I suppose we had to, and there's some disagreement about that. I understand that. But that's why it didn't matter what the momentum of the economy had been. We flipped a switch, and the switch went to off from on. Even if this had happened, let's say in 2009 or 2010, when the economy was weaker, it still would have done a lot of economic damage. But it does more now because we were so indebted. We've taken on so much debt over time. And because the stock market had an opportunity to run for many years. And coming into this period, the global economy was already fragile. The US economy was performing well, but the global economy was pretty fragile. I won't go through all of this stuff, but if you look at the second bullet, already trade wars had pushed global growth in 2019 to its lowest rate since a 0.7% contraction in 2009. So the global economy came into this period quite weak. And the International Monetary Fund was forecast that the global economy would grow this year 3.3%, which was better than 2019, not fabulous, better than 2019. But now it's predicted that the global economy will shrink by 3%. And our economic weakness affects the globe, but the globe's economic weakness affects us. We're all in this together. And so economists have finally, as a group, come to terms with how devastating this will be. And this quarter, this second quarter of 2020, will be the worst quarter of our economic lives. If we suffer through a quarter worse than this, I can tell you I will not be participating in webinars. I will just have given it up. But this is pretty bad. So forecasts for Morgan Stanley indicate a 38% decline in GDP on an annualized basis during the current quarter. Goldman Sachs 34%. By comparison, during the worst quarter of the Great Recession in late 2008, the economy shrank by 8.4%. So this is just so much worse. So many workers at high risk of layoff. I won't go through all these data. I want to get to Q&A, but if you look down below at a bolded text that says employed in occupations at high risk of layoff, 67 million Americans at high risk of layoff. That's 46% of total employment, according to a study from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So that includes your food preparation workers, your restaurant workers, people in retail. And as I say, we've suffered a lot of business shutdowns because of COVID-19. Governor said, shut it down, we shut it down. But you're going to see a lot of businesses stay shut down or shut down at some point even after the economy opens back up because the finances just don't work out anymore. A lot of empty storefronts, a lot of empty office suites. Now, I talked about initial weekly claims for unemployment insurance. And by the way, do you realize how much better the first part of the presentation was than this? I know, I get it. What can I tell you? But these are what the data are. So these are weekly claims for initial unemployment. We just received the data last Thursday for the week ending April 25th. Another 3.8 million Americans filed for unemployment. So as I said, 30.3 million roughly over the last 6 weeks. And there's lots of talk out there. A study came out recently from the Economic Policy Institute suggesting that the number of people, so if 30 million people have filed, the number of people who could file because they've been unemployed but have decided for whatever reason not to, or been unable to because of computer systems, whatever it happens to be, is another about 15 million people. So, I mean, if you quickly do the math, I mean, when I say that unemployment is approaching 20%, I may be missing it. It might be higher than that by now. What matters more perhaps than initial unemployment claims is continuing claims, because it is conceivable that somebody could file for unemployment one day and then get a job the next day. It's conceivable. I'm not saying it's likely, it's conceivable. So this is continuing claims, the number of people who are currently on unemployment. And you can see this red line here. I mean, the blue line represents pre-crisis. The red is once we got into the crisis period, and you can see it's just straight up. So that's where we are. Now, I don't want to dwell. I mean, I started out, I think, on a pretty upbeat note. I'm going to end on an upbeat note. I want to talk about where we're headed, what this recovery is going to look like for the economy. I think that matters probably more to realtors than anything else. Okay, we know the economy is bad, sir. Where's the economy headed? Okay, let's talk about that. So Oxford Economics has been one of the better forecasters, even before the crisis and during. So among other things, Oxford Economics forecasted global output will contract by about 7% during the first half of 2020 and about 2.8% for the total year, which is close to the International Monetary Fund's forecast of negative 3% growth for the world. Okay, now what I've done for you here on this graphical element is I'm showing you some history here, but I'm also showing you forecasts for 2020 and 2021. And I've broken things up by component, household spending, and government spending, so on and so forth. The black line actually is the historical performance of the global economy in terms of growth year upon year, and then the forecast for 2020 and 2021, the last two bars there. You see that black line there? If you look carefully at that black line, what do you see there? You see a V, the letter V, V for victory. There's been a lot of chatter about whether or not the recovery would be U-shaped, L-shaped, check mark, Nike swoosh, square root, V, W. Well, in the short term, it's going to be a V. It's going to be a V. And why do I say that? Not because Oxford Economics predicts it. I mean, that's fine. But that's the way it has been when we've had prior pandemics. V. Now, on this graphical element, this comes from Goldman Sachs. Too many lines on here by half. But you see that light blue colored line that goes way up and back down? That pertains to Hong Kong, 2003, during their SARS epidemic. Hong Kong, 2003. So the 0% line, that skinny black line that runs across, that is the average growth prior to the crisis for these various societies, these various periods. So what do you expect to have happen as the crisis unfolds, as the pandemic spreads? Growth goes below the pre-existing average, and in fact, significantly below in many cases. And then what happens after 1 or 2 quarters? It depends on the episode. Growth comes back. There's a lot of V's on this chart. It's going to be a V. We turn the economy off. We're going to turn it back on. Oh, I get it. We're going to turn it back on in stages. So, if you measure things in weeks, maybe it doesn't look like a V. But if you measure things in months, it's going to be a V. And I would say as bad as the second quarter has been, the third and fourth quarters are going to be fabulous from the perspective of economic growth. I'm not suggesting to you naively that we're going to get back to where we have been. Oh, no, unemployment is going to end up much higher. There's going to be a much higher vacancy rates in Main Street America, all those kinds of things. But the initial stages of recovery are going to be really quite profound. And there's a number of reasons to think about this or think this. First, there's so much stimulus. I mean, we've had 4 rounds of stimulus. So small businesses are still getting their loans. And Americans are still getting checks of various kinds, including unemployment insurance, for instance. So what's going to happen here? The supply shock ends, at least to a degree. We turn the economy back on, and all of a sudden, all this money is being pumped into the economy. We're going to come out of this period with low interest rates. Gasoline prices are rock bottom, so as people start their commutes, there's some savings there, some extra money for them there. It's going to be a V. It's going to be great. So that leads me to our final slide, the 1 forecast. So I've gone through the 9, the 7, the 3. Here comes the 1. look, I say naively or obviously, the recession has already begun globally in the United States, but I still expect this recession to be short and vicious, which is how my wife characterizes me. Now, you might say, well, Anirban, what if this thing comes back, in October, November, in the fall? What if, oh, yes, that's a possibility, of course. I'm an economist, not an epidemiologist. Not that they know either. But my very strong belief is that by September, October, November, we'll have a different toolkit. That we've already discovered as a human race that remdesivir is a possible therapy for some folks. That Pfizer is talking about an emergency vaccine by the fall. That the cure to this supply shock comes from not the federal government or the Federal Reserve. No, it comes from Regeneron, Gilead Sciences, Pfizer, Merck, Sanofi Aventis, Bayer AG. Some genius or set of geniuses in the life science community is going to get us out of this. And I believe that that is going to happen by the fall. I could be wrong, of course. But I think it's still going to be short and vicious. The best positioned people work in the public sector. They enjoy greater job stability in general, but and my hope had been that more of those folks would have held onto their jobs, but we're seeing pretty significant layoffs of public sector workers in Detroit, Los Angeles, and other parts of the country. Yeah, too bad. And as the unemployment will soon be greater than 20%, and it's conceivable that it already is. As economists, our collective expectations are still adjusting to the downside, kind of in terms of how awful this is. But again, one of the reasons is because we're trying to compare this to previous episodes. This defies comparison. It is its own thing, and it is devastating. And we'll talk about 2020 for a long time to come. But I'll tell you something. When it commences, when it commences, this recovery from the crisis will be sharp, profound, and most welcome. Look, interest rates are low. Pent-up demand is high. Let's say for automobiles. There are a lot of folks out there who are thinking, coming into Spirit, I want to buy a car. And they said, no, I'm not going to a dealership right now. No. So when they get back to it in the fall, because they got to have that C8 Corvette, who doesn't, it's phenomenal. They're going to go to the dealership. The dealership's going, I got no inventory because I haven't bought anything from the manufacturers for a while, and I was still making sales online and delivering remotely and all this kind of stuff. So they're going to go to the manufacturer and say, I need more cars. I need more light trucks. And all of a sudden, you're going to get this inventory rebuilding cycle. And people are anxious to meet again, go to restaurants, see a movie, watch the Orioles, which is the most beautiful thing a human being can do short of nurturing a child, and engage in other most wonderful of human activities. It's going to happen. I mean, it's a nice day out there. Tell me something. Aren't you going to go out there? You're going to go out there. And one of these days, you're going to be able to go out there and go to a store, and you're going to do it. And you're going to go to a restaurant, and you're going to eat there, and you're going to love it. And with that, I'll end it. Let me take Q&A now. Thanks a lot, Alyssia and everyone else.
Thank you, Anirban. Can you stop sharing?
Oh, let's see if I can stop sharing. My goodness. Let's see what's happening here. Usually I was encouraged in school to share, but here we go. I stopped sharing right there. Yeah,
there we go.
There it is.
So for those who are either watching here on Zoom or on the Facebook webinar, we do have some people watching on Facebook. If you want to, here we go. So from Reed Knox, we have a question. Do you see this becoming a depression?
A question, do I see this becoming a depression? No, I do not. The depression that begins in 1929 and lasts until 1933, which saw the U.S. unemployment rate go from 4% to 25%, so it was a multi-year episode, was accompanied by some really bad policymaking. So the government basically didn't do anything, because the theory back then, they were classical economists. And the classical economists believed that the economy just writes itself on its own, that the less you do, the faster the recovery will be. And the Great Depression, for a variety of reasons, it wasn't the case. Government had to step in. This time, government is really stepping in. And the Federal Reserve, the monetary policymakers are really stepping in. So I don't think it's a depression. I am worried about the stock market, I'll tell you honestly, because it's performed so well, it's held up so well, it makes me nervous, in fact, that it's held up so well. But in terms of the broader economy, I do not expect a depression, no.
Thank you. And Reed, thanks for your question. So again, you can ask your questions. Patty, do you have a question for Anirban?
I do have a couple. I had some at the beginning, but from listening to your talk, I have an additional one. So you mentioned about how we can expect the recovery to be a V, and people will be going back to jobs, but you kind of touched on what's going to happen, I guess, there are going to be some people that are displaced completely. And like, what do you see then as the outlook for them, that if stores are shutting down, or more companies get used to certain types of automation that they don't need as many employees, like where do you see those jobs shifting?
Yeah, complete recovery here will take years. I mean, let me be clear, 4 or 5 years, whatever it's going to be, but complete recovery is going to take a long time. And I will say also that the V could become a W. So there's going to be a period during which, we turn the economy on, there's all this stimulus that's sustaining demand as supply is coming back. So it's really wonderful dynamic in terms of economic growth. But then at some point, the stimulus runs its course. The Federal Reserve is done. They can't cut interest rates further, for instance. The federal government's not going to put forth more stimulus. And there won't be much holding the economy together, because at that point, you'll still have a lot of empty storefronts, a lot of indebtedness on corporate balance sheets and household balance sheets, a lot of people who don't have much confidence. And it is conceivable that at that point, now I'm talking about end of 2021 or 2022, something like that, at some point in the future, you could see the economy relapse. It is possible. At that time, we'll have either the same president for the second term or a new president. There'll be all kinds of calls for an infrastructure-oriented stimulus package, my guess is during that time. And so we'll see how that works out. So a lot of these economic outcomes that I'm predicting relate to political outcomes that are very difficult to predict. But there could be some vulnerability down the line. But yeah, it's going to take years. So my hope is that more Americans look more broadly at the opportunities in sectors like manufacturing and construction. I mean, not everyone should be a computer scientist, and so I think a lot of jobs that exist in the economy, like welders, go unfilled every day. A good welder in this country can make look 6 figures. We don't have enough of them. We don't have enough truck drivers. We don't have enough mechanics. We don't have enough carpenters. We don't have enough plumbers. I mean, you know that, because anytime you call a plumber as a realtor, deal with something, you guys were talking about pool maintenance and the high cost of pool maintenance. Well, there's not enough pool technicians, right? There are a lot of good jobs out there that go begging each and every day. And so I hope Americans, seeing that hotels are not hiring as they used to, retailers are not hiring as they used to, say, where else can I look to join the American middle class? And there's lots of opportunities out there still. So education training is part and parcel of getting us back to where we have.
We have a few questions coming in, which is good. Do you have an idea or an estimate of a number of foreclosures, especially landlords, since a lot of renters are not paying right now?
Oh, you're going to see, a lot of distress out there financially. When I think about foreclosures, I think about the homeowners themselves as opposed to the landlords. At some point later this year, people are going to start paying rent again. Now, can people, can a landlord hold on for 3-4 months of not receiving rent? Some can, some cannot. So you might have some properties not being foreclosed necessarily, but changing hands. So one of the things that you might expect is that there are some folks out there who are really well capitalized and are very liquid. They're probably right now in the hunt for people who are vulnerable, who don't have liquidity, and they're going to take advantage of that illiquidity to buy properties on the cheap. You're going to see a lot of properties change hands. You probably are going to see more homeowners lose their homes because they've lost their jobs. In some cases, both wife and husband, or husband and husband, wherever it happens to be, lost their jobs. And so, yeah, there's going to be more distress out there. On top of that, credit is probably going to end up being tighter coming out of this than it was before. But we see that every downturn. What happens? What do the bankers see? The bankers see more delinquencies and defaults in their loan portfolio. And so what do when that happens? They tighten credit up. That happens every time. Which means that, again, people who are well-financed, who have good credit scores coming out of this, will have even more opportunity to accumulate assets. Guess what happens during times like these? The rich get richer. It's exactly what we saw coming out of 08, 09. And you're going to see that again. But we're not going to have the widespread foreclosures that we had coming out of 08, 09. We're not going to have anything like that. No, that was that recession was almost 2 years. This is a few months.
Okay, we have a question. We have 2 so far more. What is the highest unemployment we could sustain without going into a depression?
Well, in some sense, and this will sound contradictory, we're in depression. A depression is simply defined as a 10% reduction in economic activity. So one could say that, well, relative to where we had been in March, we're already in a depression because we've already sustained that level of decline in activity, or we are very close to that. But it's going to be short-lived. I mean, and it's just a few months. So I think the peak unemployment probably gets to close to 25%. So, but it's going to come back very quickly. By the end of next year, I expect unemployment in this country to be more like 7%. So, it's just, we turn the economy off, we're going to turn it back on. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of displaced Americans, a lot of businesses that are not going to come back. So it's like a game of musical chairs. During the period of economic expansion, job seekers had a lot of chairs to sit in. I mean, employers complained about the fact that they couldn't find workers. That was the problem in America. We don't have enough workers, whether it's skilled craftspeople or just people in customer service. Now what's happened? We've removed a lot of chairs. So when the job seekers go back out there, there's not going to be as many chairs. That means higher unemployment. But again, you can call it a depression, but it's going to be the shortest depression in American history if you call it that.
Andrew asks, do you think the government should provide more stimulus packages? And if so, how many do you think the government can handle?
Right. Well, I mean, look, the government can handle as many stimulus packages as the bond market says it can. But as long as people are willing to finance the national debt, and right now the federal government is able to sell a 10-year treasury for an interest rate of 0.637%. Let's call it 0.64% for fun. And so that's less than inflation. So the federal government can float a lot of 10-year treasuries and 5-year treasuries where the interest rate's even lower, and the interest is very cheap. Now, the federal government doesn't have to balance its budget every year. State and local governments have to balance their budget every year. So I expect 2 more stimulus packages at least. I mean, there's all this talk about this the Paycheck Protection Program running out of money again. So they've done it twice now. So that could be another. But setting that aside, I expect a stimulus package for state and local governments. Mitch McConnell will be damned. I think it's going to happen because state and local governments have to balance their budgets each and every year. Okay, this is not an opportunity to force government to shrink its footprint. Right? Some people are wanting to do that, but states have been hit with the shock. They can't collect income taxes and hotel taxes and all the rest of it. So retail sales taxes. So that's one. The second is I think there's going to be an infrastructure package. I mean, Democrats, Republicans both have been talking about an infrastructure package for years, and nothing has happened. This is an opportunity for us to deal with some infrastructure issues while stimulating the U.S. economy and giving this recovery that at some point will be vulnerable some legs, because we don't want to go back into recession. I mean, if I'm right that unemployment is toward the end of 2021 is around 7%, and then we get into recession again at that point, that's just again devastating. So there's going to be calls for more stimulus, and I think you'll see at least 2 more major stimulus packages to come.
I do have a question. And you drive around, you see all of the fact that we have all now at home, so commercial space is not being used. Where do you see I think it looks like we've got so little inventory in the residential market. You in one of your slides, it was like 1.2 months of supply. A neutral market is 6 months of supply. We were hovering around 3 months, and now we're down to 1.2. But yet we're going to have a whole lot of commercial space. How do you see that playing out?
That's one of the sectors that will take the longest recovery. You're going to see a lot of bankruptcies among commercial real estate investment trusts going forward. You're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see some malls go bankrupt. And by the way, malls have been vulnerable for years, many of them. I mean, even the top malls, whether it's Towson Town Center or whatever it happens to be around the country, the really showcase malls in given regions have been under pressure, and pressure for obvious reasons, Amazon, so on and so forth. But when you've got retailers like Forever 21 has been a fabulous retailer, right? The cutting edge of teenage fashion for years, and then bam, a few years ago, they talked about Macy's management team being the best management team in retail. Now what do they talk about? Macy's is falling apart, having to close stores, so on and so forth. So a lot of vulnerability there. It's going to take a long time for that to recover. It will recover, and there'll be a new group of retailers, and those retailers will take advantage of low lease rates. So you might remember after Circuit City went bankrupt, a new retailer called H.H. Gregg came in and took over that space with much lower rents. And so it was more a real estate proposition than a selling electronics to folks proposition. But in any case, you're going to see more of that too. You're going to see a bunch of new brands come out over the next couple of years as well, new names. Are they going to be as good as Forever 21? I doubt it, because my daughters love Forever 21. But you're going to see them nonetheless. Maybe they'll be called Forever 22.
All right, last question from Mark Lichtenberg. Thank you, Mark, for watching. He says his question is not real estate related, but if you have time, what do you see as it relates to the restaurant industry workforce? More specifically, even before COVID-19, there was a huge competition for available labor. What do you see in the short term through December 2020 impact on supply, also considering workers being unwilling to come off unemployment while getting their $600 a week, I guess, PPP?
Yes, totally. So you've got the $600 federal subsidy on top of state unemployment insurance benefits, and that goes for 4 months. So I presume that that's not going to be extended. So that, 4 months, that's cut off. But over that period, as restaurants open up, a lot of those people are going to say, I'm better off staying unemployed. Now, ostensibly, I still have to look for a job, to meet my state requirements to receive unemployment insurance. But, people can do that without really looking for a job, as it turns out. And so, that's going to be a problem over the course of the summer. A lot of those employees are going to say, $600 a week plus my state benefits, and I don't have to go to work. But after that 4-week period, by the end of this year, you'll see normal dynamics. A lot of Americans are going to be very anxious to go to work and earn income. And so, in some sense, I'd hope that the federal government actually would have extended that 2 months rather than 4 months, but they've done what they have done, and it's hard to pull that back. So it's a great question. I agree that over the summer, and we're approaching the summer now, there's going to be some issues with that, about getting that restaurant and retail workforce back when there's such generous unemployment insurance benefits.
All right. So, Patty, Molly, final words? You guys are muted.
I think there's a lot of hope in what Anirban said, and I personally I think that there are a lot of buyers still ready to buy, and Alyssia, you can speak to sellers might be waiting a little bit more, but there's going to be a lot of inventory coming on the market as things open back up in the coming months.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's a whole group of people out there who are still willing to be proactive and make everything work. There's buyers that still want to buy houses. There are still sellers who still have to sell a house. The market right now isn't what it was last year, but I definitely think that if everybody works together, we're going to be able to get through this strong, and everybody's still going to be able to be in a better place at the end.
Yeah, we've definitely seen an uptick over the last week or so, and it both in showing requests, people reaching out about putting their homes on the market. So I think that people are like, okay, we may not like it, but we're kind of used to this during COVID lifestyle, and they're saying, okay, well, I'm gonna keep going if I can, if I have the ability to, and they are. So anyway, I thank you so much, Anirban. You're always a pleasure to listen to, even if it's not the best of news. It's okay, Hey, I'd rather have the truth.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try it, and I will say this, that one of the benefits for realtors is that there are a lot of people whose circumstances have changed. So some people are, and that because ultimately it's about getting to the settlement table. And it's about helping people move on to the next stage of their life or to deal with their financial realities. So there are a lot of people who need the equity in their homes and need to pull that out. They need to move for that reason. There are a lot of people who say, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm not living in Washington or Baltimore anymore. I'm going to the Eastern Shore. So if this happens again, I can be barricaded and I don't want to be so close to my neighbors. Whatever it is, a lot of people's circumstances are changing, and ultimately that's good for realtors because that gets more people to say, I got to change my circumstance.
And a great stat, if you don't already know it, is every time a home sells, and this is roughly a national stat to my understanding, it pumps about $80,000 to $85,000 back into the economy between the service providers like mortgage and title, between the inspectors, painters, contractors, going to buy things to to prep the home, going to purchase things for the new home. So, you know, buying and selling a home actually helps the economy. I believe that you said in one of the many things, and maybe we can end on this note, real estate is the straw that turns the economy. Is that you? Did you say that?
Something like that. Yeah,
I think Anirban, you said that. And I have continued to say that for years because it really does. So, you know, think about it, pumping, you know, $80,000 to $85,000 back into the local economy. And that will help continue to keep it going. So
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Alyssia.
Thank you.